Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Lee Eldridge. He's the founder of Thriving Business Dad, where he supports dads to solve the challenges of being a dad in business. He has over 20 years of experience working with athletes and business executives, which include professional rugby players and football players. He does this through his company called The Cognitive Athlete. I'll put links to Thriving Business Dad and Cognitive Athlete in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Thank you for having me, Matt. Pleasure.
No problem at all. So I thought the obvious place to start with you really is, where did the interest in sport come from before we get into coaching?
Well, as it says on the tin in terms of being dyslexic, academia was not something that I really enjoyed as a young kid.
Yeah.
And in primary school, PE days were way more exciting to get to, or if I knew I had football after or cricket. So it was my way to kind of express myself, I suppose, at a young age, where spelling tests and maths tests weren't really my forte and weren't things I enjoyed. That was my opportunity to, express and see some success in life, I suppose. And then it's led on to playing lots of different sports. And I suppose the natural kind of progression to that was wanting to help others, basically. And my coaching career started, I would imagine, I suppose, when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
I was quite keen in swimming as a kid. And a friend of mine was like, look, come down this weekend. There's a level 1 swim award to do. So over 2 weekends, did it. And then luckily there was a swimming kind of pool next to my school. And the lady who ran the swimming club was just like, look, we're looking for a young teacher. Do you want to come? And so, I was getting paid a good amount of money teaching kids to swim, whereas my friends were stacking shelves in Tesco's and other various supermarkets. And then, kind of, I think probably my most memorable kind of understanding of that was when 6-year-old kid fell into a swimming pool in Spain, very close to drowning, massive fear of water, and then kind of his parents, bringing him back, saying, look, we understand this is a life skill, and kind of guiding him all the way through to be able to get back in the water, swim a width, swim a length, jump, that kind of stuff. And that was like that moment where I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. And that was it, basically.
Yeah. Imagine that kind of moment where that kid must have been absolutely terrified.
Yeah, it's pretty tough to, even get him kind of poolside to start off with. And lots went into that to kind of get him to where he was. And so, it was an amazing kind of experience. And I thought to myself, that's where kind of success lies in some respects.
Yeah. So I want to kind of roll back. You mentioned in sort of talking about your interest in sport, about being dyslexic at school. Were you aware you were dyslexic at the time, or you just knew you were struggling?
No. So I did my A-levels. I did 2 years at college and then went to university straight in at second year. So I skipped the first year. Our lecturer was like, right, okay, instead of hand typing this paper out, we're going to do an exam practice. I want you to handwrite it. Did it. Not in an exam scenario, but just at home or whatever. I brought it in. And then he's like, I think, have you ever been, you're dyslexic, aren't you? And I was like, no. And he was like, yeah, I think you are. I think you need to go get assessed. So luckily, obviously getting assessed in university is paid for, or was paid for back when I did it. And then, so all the kind of positives that came from that, from a support point of view, in terms of a weekly meeting with, a lovely lady that kind of sat down and went through work or studying, and then extra time in exams. So that would have been when I was 20, I suppose. So I'd managed to kind of somehow get through A-levels, somehow get through college into university with a lack of support.
Yeah. So I'm in the 20s. There's quite a few people come on this podcast that tend to be sort of university, so early days uni stuff, just as I guess it pinches even harder at that point, or like a story like yourself where you hand a thing into a lecturer and they're like, do you want to talk about this a bit more? Do you think, looking back, when you finally knew that it was dyslexia, they were like, that's why X happened in school or Y happened in school?
Yeah, I think, especially in primary school, I think, we're talking late 80s, early 90s. If I look back, and some of the vivid memories that I had were hugely negative in terms of, spelling tests and reading out how many you got right, and people laughing at you, and that environment is just never set up to be able to let people thrive and learn. And what's the stats? 1 in 5 kids are dyslexic, and I don't think a fifth of the time that teachers spend learning to teach is spent on teaching dyslexic kids. I think that's, now that I've got a young family and you kind of external to that environment because you're not in there, that school, you're not in the lessons. It's really tough to kind of see or think, why is this not being addressed, basically. And, I still see it in schools today, benchmarking, spellings, we're just kind of, to a certain degree, I suppose, repeating the mistakes that we have made down the line, basically. And so, it was primary school was pretty tough. Secondary school got better because you can pick and choose a little bit more on what you study. And, if you have a bit of a passion about something you're studying, it's not as much of a grind to get in there and get it done. And so I think the positives that have come around from it was kind of, I couldn't be a lastminute.com kind of assignment type of person. I had to get it done at least a week in advance so that I could go into the meeting to sit down and, go through it. And ultimately, whereas, uni mates kind of up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and then handing things in, I was just like, that there's no point, it's gonna end in disaster, basically. So I think that it depends. Again, your past, I think somebody said to me, it was quite cool, the past it's a school, not a club. So, you're not kind of in the club of whatever. You're like, look, this is stuff to learn from. So I think in terms of my own kind of inner workings, I've kind of come to terms with those kind of memories, basically.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. How flatmate I used to have at uni would be able to do all-nighters on various lots and lots of energy drinks and somehow turn these blinding reports in. And I'd been grinding out for like 2-3 weeks at that point. And it's like, how can you possibly do this? Running towards the box to post them in at the last minute after they've been awake all night. And I'm like, this doesn't work. Surely it does not work. That's a funny thing. So did you keep your hand in competing in sports for very long? Because obviously you said 17, you started touching on the coaching and doing swimming and worked your way through there.
I was always keen at golf. So that was kind of, went to college to a bit of golf and bits and pieces like that. Then went to university. Golf wasn't really a thing there. So I started playing hockey. And again, level 1 hockey, started doing a bit of coaching. And once you kind of go down that sport route and you want to get a little bit more serious about it, then you can't play it at the weekends because you're kind of coaching or you're traveling.
Of course, yes, because you'd be playing at the same time as you should be coaching. Yes.
Yeah. So it worked for a little bit of a few years, and then kind of I was like, right, the goal is to work in professional sports. So a master's was kind of the next logical step from an education point of view. Yes. For now, some people say a rubber stamp, but there's huge grounding in doing an undergrad, but there's bigger grounding in doing a master's. Okay, yeah. And yeah, once you start working in professional sport, that's your weekends are gone. Depending, I was lucky enough to play a couple of football games here and there with some mates because we played on a Sunday, which means you can play on a Saturday afternoon. So there is opportunities, but it's pretty much done and dusted, really.
Yes. I can see that, and yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? That you're doing the coaching at the same time as all the games that happen. So it's really interesting. You have to have a master's to be a professional sports coach. So how did you find the master's bit of it? I mean, my degree is in engineering, so it's probably quite different to doing sports coaching. Is there quite a lot of practical elements to involved, or is it a lot of studying theory, or how does that work, and how could you tailor that to suit sort of the dyslexic thinking you have at the time?
I think that, sports science undergrads get a huge kind of disservice because people think, oh, you just turn up to university and you play a bit of sport and that's it. Well, it's quite an academic course. There is, especially first couple of years, there is psychology, sociology, biology, physics, biomechanics. There's lots that goes with it. And the master's program is exactly the same. There's no kind of like points because you're good at sports. I think, again, from a dyslexic point of view or just a studying point of view, again, if it's something that you enjoy doing, so I'm hoping that most people who've decided to do a master's is, it's kind of a very specific kind of year or 2 years to spend your life. You should, in theory, have quite a bit of passion about it. So if you have that bit of passion, then it makes life a little bit easier. It's easier to get focused. It's easier to, whether you want to talk about, I suppose, ADHD and ADD and the links with dyslexia and both ways back. Sometimes for me, concentration is tough. My mind wanders, it walks off, it goes to different places. So again, it's kind of creating the right environment to do what you need to do. Like, I look at people on trains reading a book and I'm just like, or stood up going up the tube reading a book, and I was like, how is any of that information going into your brain and being stored? And I'm just like, no, for me, if I'm reading and I want to take something on, it has to be silence. I have to be here on my own. It's kind of, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. I remember doing that. I always had the Pavlovian response with reading, where I end up going to sleep instead because I was reading in bed. So, obviously, the masters, at that point, you knew you'd been stated with dyslexia because you picked up at 20s. What did you change? Two parts of this question, really. What did you change personally? Because you're like, now I know what's happening. I will change this. And what support did you get as well from the outside?
I suppose label is like not a great term, but it was good to not necessarily say it's not your fault, but I think that a lot of dyslexics usually blame themselves. There's a big area where, you believe it's your fault that you are this way. Whereas, once you, I suppose, label it and you start to read up around it and you read stuff about bits and pieces of it, you get into that kind of understanding that there's a whole wealth of information out there that you can start to access, you can start to learn. And also, I think from a support point of view, it's kind of nice to sit down with somebody who is an expert in working with people with dyslexia, and they've seen it before, and they can start to kind of guide you through bits and pieces, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And was there any particular things that you really stood out for you as something you're like, yes, this is great?
I think obviously in terms of just talking to that individual was really good, because I think there's moments where, not just from a kind of technical point of view in terms of, right, when you study, use lots of different colors, mind mapping, all those types of things. Mind mapping for me was a real big area of kind of, it was just, it was amazing to kind of be able to mind map for an exam and just see that as a visual thing. Whereas obviously from a sports point of view, I was always quite good with kind of the visual and the kinesthetic, because that's what we see, we do. But so that was kind of it, to see how to take all this information on a piece of paper and then draw it out and that was quite a really good thing for me, basically, I'd say, from a support point of view, to really go down that route.
Yeah, mind maps really popular. And did you ever use any software? Or were you the kind of mad post-it notes on the board kind of person?
No, I was more kind of 2 A4 pieces of paper stuck together, and big kind of colourful thing, and lots of drawings, and to try to, because sometimes especially from a sports science, and you probably get it from an engineering point of view, or to try and take those words and build pictures in your head from a memory point of view. And it is really helpful.
Yes, yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned about the sport world and moving around the kinesthetics, because as dyslexic thinkers, seeing that kind of stuff is quite easy for us, isn't it? So I imagine your strength in coaching comes from sort of being dyslexic and using that kind of thinking to build into it. How did you find that when you got into the world of professional sports? Because sort of fast forward a few years after uni and you've got yourself into, well, you probably had to grind quite hard to get into professional sports. I imagine it's quite competitive.
It's pretty competitive, yes. Yeah, I think that the big outset is that you see people, but there are lots of things happening outside of the world of sport and training. There's lots of stuff outside of it. It's not just time spent in the gym or running around. There's these, we just see them as athletes that entertain us and go out to perform, but they have relationships, they have families. There's lots more, and I think that from a dyslexic point of view is kind of an interesting thing, that you see somebody who's struggling or challenging or challenged, that that there's deeper things going on all the time with people. I think that's where it can be quite opening for somebody to have not necessarily a learning difficulty or anything like that, but to have a bit more appreciation of what goes on. And I think that then transferred more into kind of the corporate stuff I do, because sometimes we can see people who are very successful, very experienced, good titles in big companies, probably earning good money, and you think, right, success, happy days. And then actually when you start to peel back a few things, there's some struggles going on.
You're not the first athlete coach who've got on that then moves their way into the corporate world. And what I've heard is it's not usually different. It's like just dealing with competitive people. They just don't run around and push bikes around or anything.
Yeah, I think sometimes we try to force similarities too much in terms of sport and into the business world, because it feels good for people. Because in sport, this idea of, better never stops. We're always kind of trying to get these marginal gains. We're always black box think, all these areas of like what have come from kind of world-renowned practitioners into this kind of environment. And ultimately, the biggest difference in business is that 9 times out of 10, you do not get to choose when you perform. You don't say, right, we are competing on Saturday on a 3:00. All our week, all our prep, or all our build up is all surrounded by that 3:00 kickoff. Whereas in business, every day there could be a 3:00 kickoff. You just don't have that kind of control or element to it. So, we would play on a Saturday, for example. Sunday, the players would have off. Obviously, we'd say to them, look, go do your recovery sessions, go use the pool, blah, blah, blah. Monday, you come in. Monday, normally in the morning, is a bit of a kind of a debrief. Depending on what sports you are, you'd have kind of some units, talk about each other, bit of light training, do some stuff in the gym. And we would then just slowly basically ramp it up to a Tuesday and then pull it back down again for a Saturday kickoff. So there's this whole, what we would call a micro periodized cycle, so a small cycle that we go through even during the course of a day. But for me in business, it just doesn't really work like that. There's all elements where, I see it, especially, some of the management consultancies that I've worked for, is that, they finish a big project and then the next day they're on to another big project. They're never kind of like, right, we finished this big project. Let's just take 1-2 days to zone out and to have a bit of a think of like what went well, what didn't go well, blah, 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 blah. That process is going on, but there's also another project already kicking off. So their brain is already kind of half on that. So yeah, I think we try to kind of squeeze a lot into that similarities model. And I do think that, the whole kind of paradigm of well-being and performance is something that we get a lot in sport, but we don't really get in business. If that makes sense.
It was kind of interesting. I was thinking my own work, where it's like, cut the day slack straight into the next project. And you were saying about the analogy to sport, where you have the recovery days. It's like, recovery days in work don't necessarily happen, and it's an interesting point, and I imagine it's a tricky sell to a company that, hey, you probably should take a couple of days to stop, think, reflect, write this all down before we get launching headlong into the next shiny thing.
Yeah, and also the difference is in professional sport, the career is short.
Yeah.
Professional rugby players anywhere between, maybe some injuries, but normally, 30 to 35 is the ballpark for people retiring. But in business, you're looking 60, 65. It's an endurance game. It's a long-term kind of competitive cycle. So, and this is one thing that I really kind of try to get across with people, is that high performance, and all businesses say we're high performing. Well, I really don't want high performance, because what you want is sustainable high performance over longer periods of time. We don't just want, in sport, we never just want us to win a one-off match. We're competing in a championship where we need to win multiple games. So sustainability is the one. And so that's where kind of, how that 1 day or 2 days off over the course of a year. But if you think of it from a sustainability point of view, that might stop burnout, risk, underperforming, stop them leaving for a different company. Like, there's all benefits.
Yeah, definitely. And it is, isn't it? Like, you see people are wired and fried, and it's the difference between, particularly as we record this in January, so quite a lot of companies may have had a shutdown over Christmas. So the rather dark-eyed people who left at the end of December to the bright, sparky people who come back in January after a week off of Christmas celebrations and not working at all. And it's surprising how much that sort of the whole company stops, can make a big difference to how people are when they kick back on in January.
Yeah, and I think, we finished playing our last game. Most of the athletes, they'll have 4 weeks off. Okay, they'll do bits and pieces, but Christmas really for lots of companies is a complete halt. Whereas I think even if people go away in the summer or whatever, the business is still turning over. Especially with the dads I work with now, if they're founder owners, that it's very difficult, especially early stage or even mid stage, to really step away and not, even though people are saying, look, don't worry, we've got it. In the back of your head, you're like, I wonder what's happening here. I wonder what's doing. Did he do that? Did she do this? Did they do that?
Yeah, definitely. One point I wanted to circle back round to was, you were mentioning, obviously, with sport, you're kind of peaking for Saturday and then dropping off and coming back up. But with business, you don't necessarily know when go time is. It could be 3:00 on a Tuesday afternoon and then again on a Wednesday and nothing on Thursday. How do you coach people to cope with that kind of sudden dynamic of load, rather than kind of, because some people really like to know what's going to happen, and other people seem pretty fine with the whole world moving underneath them. They just kind of carry on like a duck on water.
So if we work backwards, that there always needs to be some recovery at some point. So a lot of the dads, for example, I work with, they they're under huge amounts of stress at work, so they kind of hide this emotional, so we look at the well-being from the 4 pillars of well-being. You've got mental, physical, social, and emotional well-being. And so most people talk about, I would say, mental as their mental health as being the biggest one, and then some people talk about physical health, but kind of social and emotional kind of gets put back to one side. But what I mean by that is, we're under that pressure, and especially leaders or, people look to you and like, you can't be panicking because you're the leader. And then obviously you go home and again, you might be under a stressful situation. Don't want to, if the business isn't doing well or you've lost a client or whatever it might look like. And we kind of hold in this emotional turmoil, and it's like, right, when does it come out? And we then, if it doesn't come out or we don't select a time to let it out, then it will come out at some point, whether that's an argument with a colleague or you get home and, you shout at your kids or your wife or partner or whatever it might be. So what we have to understand is that if we have a stressful event, so that Tuesday, whatever it might be, client meeting or whatever it is, that not as soon as it finishes, but after that time, there has to be a period where you're like, right, okay, let's just breathe, let's just reflect, let's just try and learn from what that's going on. Now, again, if we flip it to pre, our physiology matches our psychology and our psychology matches our physiology. So we can do lots of things in the build up to something very stressful, i.e. again, like breathing, doing some really simple things to kind of set us in the right state. So for me, when we talk about performance, the best performers in the world, if you look at them and they're equally talented, they're equally worked as hard, whatever it might be, it's just the person who's in the best state at that point in their time that wins, basically. The person who can get into that state the quickest or whatever it might be. So whatever we can do with that. Now, for those people that love this kind of topsy-turvy all the way on, they just have to be a little bit kind of more understanding of having some awareness of, because normally however you just define stress is very different. People define it in different ways, but what your triggers are of when you're under stress. We really want to try to spot them as early as possible so that we can do whatever we need to do to build them in. And the flip side is that actually stress is a really good thing that people don't get. It gets a really hugely not negative connotation because people are like, oh, I'm so stressed, da, da, da. Right. But you and I wouldn't be having this conversation if over the course of our lives we hadn't been put under stress or put ourselves under stress to get to somewhere. Stress ultimately does change you, and positive or negative, it's down to you basically.
Yes. Yeah. I guess it's, as you say, making sure you look after the 4 pillars and building the de-stressing parts in, so you're not coming home and the cat gets it, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at the pillars, that just because one wobbles or mental health, we can really do lots of amazing things to support our mental health by taking care of our physical, social, and emotional.
Yes, yeah.
So, I think Paul Merson, the ex-Arsenal football player that's obviously gone through depression, being an alcoholic, I think he had a TV show where he did a walk and he was talking about his stuff, and he just made a really good comment. He's like, depression is like a friend that just wants you to be on your own. So people who are struggling with mental health, you just want to be on your own. So that is where that social connection, I think that we're not great at this because of just the way that things are, and that's where things go.
Yes, I could see that. And it's, like we're here talking, the theme of this podcast, dyslexia, and that is, you cited at school, you had sport to save you, and I had science to save me, and like, we'd have been in pretty bad shape, I think, otherwise. Shaking all that off and being able to get on with it. But quite a lot of people in neurodiversity do struggle with that kind of stuff. And it can feel like, particularly if you don't know, like yourself, when it wasn't till 20, sometimes you go, what the hell is up with me here? Why is everybody else finding this easy? So it's hard sometimes.
And I think that to go back to your original thing where you said, you'd been assessed and, again, not the label, but it's quite refreshing when somebody's like, I've also, been assessed as this, and you can have a mutual conversation. I'm sure that you would, if somebody's like, I'm into science, I'm into, you would naturally have a kind of a rapport with them, basically. And I think that's where, again, getting a group or being part of a group of people that are kind of going through similar struggles to you is really powerful. And I think that's something that, these shows and everyone not necessarily being more authentic, but just putting it out there that they struggle or they're looking to speak to people about this. I think that's a really big,
I think it
big
helps.
thing.
It certainly helps, even if you're not alone, even if it's just somebody coming out the radio in your car telling you that they've had a similar experience, even if it's not a face-to-face interaction.
Like what? Yeah.
Well, I wanted to kind of move on to interesting kind of thing. You've moved into dads in business, like specialised down from your professional athletes to your business execs, now it's dads. And something on your profile is like you had the daddy moment. So can you tell me what that moment actually is and what that sparked in you?
Yeah, so November 21, I was just playing Lego with my daughter. She would have been around 4 by the time. And we're just playing Lego on the carpet. It's Saturday morning. And for me, my head was kind of away thinking about some clients or I need to message this person. And I was just away. And then eventually I just heard, my daughter kind of screaming at me because we were playing Lego together. And you don't need to shout at me. She's like, yeah, but I have been saying it multiple times to you or shouting at you for a long period of time. And I just realized then that actually how many other dads are probably in the same situation where they're in the room, but they're not really engaged or they're not really present or however you want to put it. And for me, engagement is the big one. And I was like, right, okay, that's not the deal basically in terms of how I wanted to be a dad. I know that obviously, there is a provider part of being a dad and financial and whatever that might look like. But that was kind of that moment. I was like, right, there must be other dads out there struggling. And in my other roles, I'm going back to that state, that engagement state that I learn how to support people to get into that state. Well, my mind was like, well, if people are struggling, then there must be support that they need or whatever. So then that was like, right, okay, let's see what's out there from a research point of view. And there wasn't really much. So then I was like, right, okay, let's go and interview some dads. So I think I'm up to about 85, 90 dads now, where just interviewing them in terms of their biggest challenges, their biggest fears, what that looks like for them. And it's just grown from that basically.
Okay. And how did you find that once you got talking to other dads? You could then start blending your sports background and your executive background into how to coach them. How does that look? How are you? And not being a parent myself, it's kind of tricky for me to kind of understand, I guess. But what did you find really started to work? Was there some sort of common things that dads were doing in terms of trying to juggle businesses and parenthood that you really realized that you needed to kind of dig into?
Yeah, so if I put my kind of sports hat on, so, the first probably lesson that you might learn or lecture that you might attend in sports science is, how to carry out a needs analysis, which is basically, we're released into the world as sports scientists. You in theory, you could work in any sport because you can sit down and say, right, what is the latest research? What coaches do I need to go and speak to? what athletes do I need to watch and then, right, okay, what can we do to support these people? So for me, it's like, right, from doing that interviews and that getting that kind of needs analysis, it's like clearly there's an element of, the biggest challenge is always, to a certain degree, lack of time. It's the number. I've just got no time. I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to be a senior leader in a business. The demands are so high that I just don't have enough time to spend with my kids. That's the first one. Next is that lack of engagement, like we touched before, even if they are spending time with their kids, that they're so wired from work and stressed and, things going well or not going well. And then the last one is a lot of kind of discussions around what success is and what success looks like for them and where that comes from. Really, for me, that's kind of opened up the doors of lots of us look at the problems that we have in our life, and lots of them are external. And actually, the main way to sort them out is going more kind of internal and going kind of, right, okay. So a prime example, especially dyslexia, is like those memories of negativity. How do they affect me, or how have they affected me in the past? In terms of lack of confidence, lack of not wanting to write on a board or read out aloud, and you're like, right, well, once you start to get in your mind frame that there are obstacles and that's the way to kind of move forward. And so from that, how it looks like is, one, quite challenging because men are really poor at saying, yeah, I've got a problem or I need some help. That kind of first step, I'm not saying it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, but going in that room and going to a meeting and saying that those words, that's the big first step, I suppose. And then kind of supporting them and say, right, okay, we need to get a really clear kind of, right, where do we want to go? What do we want things to look like, feel like, or hear like, or whatever they kind of use as a representation model. And then, right, what kind of your values? What do you stand for? But more importantly, what do you not stand for? And lastly, like, purpose is this big all-encompassing, you've got to find your purpose, But for me, it's like, right, what do you feel as if like your passion, and what do you want to be kind of doing on a day-to-day basis? And once you start to put them all together, it kind of helps that, well, actually, it's not a lack of time, it's a lack of energy. So you're doing things that are taking away energy from you, which enable or stops you having the energy to be present, having the energy to engage, and ultimately define a better looking model of success for you. And that's what we kind of start to get into. And it's really interesting to work with lots of different dads from lots of different industries, from musicians kind of all the way through to traders. There's a real big kind of huge spectrum of people you work with. But, the big three kind of rules are, or everyone's busy, everybody's got problems, but ultimately everybody's trying to do the best they can with the skills they've got. I think if you walk through life with those three kind of things in your head, when you have an interaction with somebody and they are reacting negatively, or what we believe is negatively, you can start to unpick it and say, right, okay, yeah. Everyone's got problems and everyone's trying to do their best.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a nice way of thinking about it, isn't it? Everybody's busy, everybody's got problems, and everybody's trying to do the best with the skills they have. It's when somebody's nearly blowing a gasket in front of you, it's like, well, what else is going on with it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's, we react to that external, you just react to it, that you kind of, if we look at from a kind of stimulus response point of view, quicker the response, the more emotional that you're going to get. The more time you give it, the more rational you're going.
Yes.
You know, you watch children, they react very quickly. It's emotional.
Yes.
In theory, adults should be able to say, well, step back, be a bit more rational, but that's not the case in some respects.
There's some adults really not really good at that at all. And then you got the absolute Zen masters here, just like, carry on. So you said it's not a lack of time, it's a lack of energy. When you say a lack of energy, is that are you referring more to mental energy than physically having enough energy to do everything you want to do? Is that kind of where you're leaning towards? Or is it like they've only had 4 hours sleep and they're just absolutely on reserve at that point in the day?
Yeah, so it's kind of all encompassing to a certain degree that people talk to me a lot, or I see a lot about people talking about, positive mental attitude or mindset. Well, no disrespect, that the more sleep you get, naturally, the more kind of positive people feel about themselves and feel about their lives. So what are you doing to give yourself the utmost opportunity to have energy during the course of the day? Now, again, sleep and physical activity is a huge part of it, but, what are you eating? What conversations are you having? We kind of touched on it right at the start. Are you doing things that really excite you? And, it's amazing how the surfer in California, isn't it? The surfer that can get up at 4 a.m. to go and catch a big wave, but then can't get up at 8:30 to get to his office job because it just they don't enjoy doing it. So it's trying to get those moments during the course of the week that kind of keep people kind of excited about life, basically. And not only that, not just letting them happen, sitting down and saying, right, what does our year look like? Okay, these are our 2 big family holidays, or a holiday, or whatever it might look like. Well, okay, what are we doing at the weekend? And you start to build and build and build onto kind of a bit of like exactly how we would do in sports, that bit of a yearly plan of like what training we're going to be doing, where we're going to be, and that kind of stuff. So I think that is a huge element that comes into play.
Yes. Yeah. Having had jobs on both sides of the coin, it's certainly damn so easy to get up in the morning and, even work out and do crazy stuff like that before going to work, if work isn't fun. And I heard somewhere ages ago that you spend more time with your work colleagues than you do your family once you subtract sleep from everything. So.
Yeah, I think, if you look at kind of the stats, you will spend 75% of the whole entire time you spent with your children when they're under the age of 7.
Wow. Yeah.
And then when they get to an age of kind of, I think it's around 15, 90% of the time that you're ever going to spend with your kids is done.
Yeah.
And then if they like you, you'll probably get to finish off that other 10%.
Yeah.
So that, for me, when I saw that stat, it is just kind of wow, because a lot of the dads I work with, it's like, right, it'll be okay when, it'll be okay when we're turning over this, or then I'll be able to step back from the business, or then I'll be able to do this. And you're like, when? And it's, it's a bit like climbing a mountain. As soon as you've climbed a mountain, the goal is to climb a higher mountain. And you're like, keep going and going and going until you're like, right, well, you climb Everest and you're like, well, what's next? And it's a shame because especially some of the senior guys in corporate is that, they do all this to provide and they just end up, unfortunately, not spending that crucial time with their kids to really get to know them or to support them. And I know, we need to provide and you're like, right, okay, but there's lots multifaceted that comes to being a dad, especially, and we can go down the kind of discussion of what people expect dads to do, go to work, put food on the table, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's the goal. But there is also huge evidence around the importance of kids having good, strong father figures and male figures, relationships. Because again, if you think of young children, to a certain degree, most of their time will be spent with females until maybe secondary school. I know for me, if I look back now, my first male teacher was probably by the time I was 11 years old.
Yeah. I can't think of a primary school teacher I had that was male.
And that's so if your dad works, you spend all your time with your mum. So as a role model that, and I call it the dad paradox, whereby dads are trying to be the best dad they can be and whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so, that's that, making sure that when you do step in the door, you've got energy to give them is key. And, making sure that you have some system to shut down from work and to change your clothes or whatever it might be, or become the dad is really difficult.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah.
And that's why I think commuting for work is actually hugely beneficial. People are like, I can work from home. I don't have to commute, blah, blah, blah. But you don't have that, ride on the train or drive or cycle or walk, whatever it is, just to de-stress and just to work out all those things, so that hopefully by the time you get to the front door, you open the door and you're like, right, new role, dad, parent, wife, husband, whatever it might be.
The windscreen of the car's taken all instead, yes.
Whereas now, we're in an office or whatever, in a bedroom, and you just take all that stress just straight into that environment.
Yeah, even silly stuff is, even if you work from home and you just wear different clothes to work from, rather than your pajamas or something like that. Or
or just going for a walk. Just finishing and just taking a little bit of a walk around outside or that block, or whatever it is to kind of bookend. And again, always goes back to getting into the right state and think, right, okay, look, now my priority becomes them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's an interesting thing. It kind of got me thinking, a slight tangent really on that point, is the talking to somebody, the previous guest in this podcast, how they would mask a lot about their neurodiversity in their personality. So they're a different person at work because they have to be the person they feel like they need to be. And that's got to be exhausting, to then be able to decompress from who that is to the parent role, or just you, I suppose, is a real hard thing to switch between. I guess not masking helps, but for some people, that's a really hard thing to do and an easy thing for other people. So.
Yeah, and I think the kind of not fake it till you make it, or being someone else who you can't, who people around you, or what you think you should be, eventually that will come and bite you around, because it's so energy sapping to have this internal conflict going on board that nobody can see. If I think back to my kind of start off for coaching, and I'd be a junior coach, and you look up to the senior and you think, right, look, that's the way, that's it. So then you put this persona on to copy how they did and what they said and what they did, but it wasn't you. You were basically just being an actor of them, not doing it as well as them because you were not them. And you would take up all this energy, and then eventually you'd have to revert back into you. And then people would be like, well, hold on, 1 minute this, and then now you're like this. Then, you're so fake, or whatever it be. I think from a dyslexic point of view, I think that's one thing is, that's massively common, I reckon. You hide this thing, whatever you want to call it. You get really good at school and making sure you didn't do the things you didn't like doing, because you knew that ultimately kids are not very forgiving at that age, and they will find a way to laugh at you and make fun of you. So I don't know about you, but you'd always find their way not to have to read a book at school out loud
Yeah.
Not to, write up on the board or do this or anything that you knew. And I think to a certain degree, it's quite not necessarily, it might be a good thing that you learn a lot more about yourself quite early on down that line. And I think, but I always, Fridays was always, especially in primary school, Fridays was always a conundrum because we always played football on Friday afternoon, happy days, but it's always kind of on Friday morning. So it's like, right, how do you manage this stress of just getting this done, basically?
Yeah, definitely. I think as much as you wouldn't want other kids to go through it, the resilience and the self-search you have to do at a young age sometimes can help later on in things. But yeah.
And I think that with that resilience factor, but sometimes it'd just be great just for somebody to pull you across and just say, hey, look, you're doing okay. It's going to be, I think that has been a process of kind of internal work where it's like, look, things happen for a reason. And if you went back, it'd be great just to be, on your shoulder and say, look, it's going to be okay. You're going to be all right. You're going to make it.
Yeah.
Instead of like sweating on a Friday as a 9-year-old doing spellings, it's not the most important thing in the world, or it's not life-defining moments.
No, it's not, even though it feels like it at the time. How to do spellings right on the board. Please, can we not do this again? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to start winding the podcast up now, and every guest that comes on this podcast gets 3 rapid-fire questions from me. They don't necessarily need rapid-fire answers from yourself, so I'll dive into the first one, which is, what prejudice have you had about dyslexia that has been proven wrong?
Okay. I think the easiest one is that you're lazy.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, he's just lazy. Well, no, I don't. That doesn't work like that. See, no. I think that's the one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's a bit of a curse, particularly in the sort of school system where you're one of the hardest working people there, and you're also branded the laziest person there. So it just doesn't work. I can't get it to work. Okay, rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
That's a good question. I think that it is, in simple terms, we or dyslexic just see things differently. And I think that's a huge superpower. Basically, I think that's that we would, just as they see human beings as different beasts, there are different beasts within different beasts. I think we're just, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily, it's hugely positive that, well, in an age of diversity that we're looking for, that hopefully more will come out.
Definitely. Okay, and the final question is rapid fire set. And seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, what is your favourite dyslexia life hack?
If I went down now, I think it would have to be that how far or really trying to drive deep into how technology is going to support dyslexics moving forward. If I think back now to, at university when I was first assessed and then kind of got, access to a speech and text kind of technology, I thought this is kind of game changer. That was 20 years ago. And now the way that technologies move forward to a certain degree, not that any kid now, I'm not saying they'll have it easier, but I think that there's going to be more access for them to be able to utilize technologies. And I think that comes real full circles back to the education system is like, right, okay, what are we preparing children for the future, or are we just kind of going through the motions of teaching them in the past?
Yes, an interesting question.
And I'm sure I'd love to discuss with some teachers, but no teacher really wants to talk to me about
it. Yes, it's a tricky one to, I think, get stuck into. Quite a thorny subject, that one, isn't it? Okay, Lee. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast. But before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you, if you'd like them to?
No. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to kind of, obviously, hopefully, send some messages out there and speak to people with challenges all across, not just dyslexia. Where people find me, mostly on LinkedIn in terms from a social media point of view. But yeah, and I'll give you my email address, and if you put that on the show notes, I'm more than happy to have conversations with anyone, but especially kind of business dads. I'm always keen to interview and kind of keep the research going because it supports me and what I do, but also in a greater long-term picture as well.
Well, thank you once again for taking the time to be on the show. I will link to Lee in the show notes as well for people that want to find him. And that just leaves me to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.